Anniversaries, whether it's your birthday or wedding, it's a time of celebrating how much time has gone since it all began, and in today's culture, it's become a global phenomenon to celebrate works of fiction and even companies. However, what happens when an anniversary, instead of celebrating the impact it left on you, makes you question why you even became invested? So for this video, I'm going to take a look at various anniversaries that ended up treating the brand like a disliked family member on life support. Criteria are it must be a milestone anniversary, i.e. 5ths or 10ths. Plus, there must have been either reputational or monetary damage done, so while the 20th anniversary of Star Wars brought us the special editions, that was a huge success, though the galaxy far far away isn't off the hook. You can probably guess that this was going to be here, so let's dash with the textbook example of how to celebrate and ruin a franchise reputation at once. You know Sonic, the mascot of Sega and former rival to Mario. Since his debut in the 90s, he has been a leading figure in the mascot gaming, with emphasis on speed and attitude. However, there was a time when the Hedgehog struggled to keep his needle sharp. Following Sega's transition into a third-party company, Sonic was fighting for relevancy. While he performed laps on the handhelds, he struggled on consoles, with Sonic Heroes and especially Shadow the Hedgehog showing signs of a dying franchise. However, with the 15th anniversary coming up, Sega decided to take Sonic further than he had before, with a game that not only took advantage of upcoming 7th generation systems, but also rebirthed the Sonic franchise inspired by the success of Spider-Man 2 and Batman Begins, even titling the game simply Sonic the Hedgehog to reinforce a huge blockbuster using the classic IP. This game would take Sonic into a more realistic world, populated by photorealistic humans, as well as a deeper, more fleshed out story than previous games offered. As a way of showing off the new physics engine, a new character named Silver the Hedgehog was created, whom has the power of psychokinesis, allowing for interactions with the environment, as well as adding new blood to the franchise. Overall, everything was in place for Sonic to stay on track in the ever-changing landscape of gaming. However, as you can tell from the title and thumbnail, everything didn't stay on track. Sega had locked in a November 2006 release date and refused to change it, which put the development team under pressure to get the game out, to the point they had no time for debugging and playtesting, which meant the game was shipped unfinished for broken gameplay mechanics and glitches a dozen. And despite their ambitions for the title, all of them suffered in one way or another. While the world itself looked beautiful, Sonic and his friends' largely unchanged designs clashed with the photorealistic environment, and despite trying to flesh out the story more than its predecessors, it was bogged down with a weak script filled with plot holes and character dynamics so poorly fleshed out that it made the whole narrative feel disconnected. However, this wouldn't be the only game released for the anniversary, as we got 2 racing games and a port of the original Mega Drive game for the GBA. Sonic Riders was definitely the best game to come out from this mess, only bogged down by its inclusion of gameplay mechanics that spoiled the pick up and play aspect, perfected by Mario Kart. Sonic Rivals took the gameplay of the original Sonic and adapted it into a racing game, but in the end it's unremarkably average, only bolstered by the failure of its main entry. Finally, there's Sonic Genesis, which, while people expected a way of playing the original Sonic on the go that wasn't the Game Gear version, what they got was a compromised port with a cropped screen, horrible renditions of the classic tunes, and broken physics that destroyed Sonic's perfect track record on the GBA. After something this disastrous, you think that this would be the last dash for Sonic, but Sega didn't give up on him as they buckled down on their next entry, which ended up being Sonic Unleashed, which despite having some issues was the first step to redeeming the franchise, and by the 20th anniversary in 2011, Sonic was back in a place he could call stable. The lesson to be taken from this mess is to never assume your audience will buy a broken product and accept it, just because you plastered their favourite characters all over it. We now switch a blue blur for a blue bomber as we scroll through another popular franchise that had a rocky celebration. Mega Man dominated the 80s and 90s, whether it was the classic side-scroller on the NES to the darker, faster-paced X series, as it stood at the center of Capcom's crown of achievements. However, once they realized people preferred shooting zombies to a soundtrack of awkward dialogue, they rolled their rock to the side while they continued to traumatize children. Jumping to the early 2000s and with the 15th anniversary upcoming, Mega Man had continued to evolve with the X series and its successor the Zero series, along with the Battle Network and its anime, NT Warriors, introducing a new generation of fans. However, despite having 3 different series running, Capcom must have thought that wasn't enough, and wanting the Blue Bomber to make an impact, pushed out multiple different games throughout 2003, and all of them had issues. Well, not really. Mega Man Zero 2 came out the least unscathed, as it followed its predecessor with improved gameplay and new mechanics to freshen things up. There was also the Rockman Collection Special Box, which included 6 NES games and pins for your shirt. As for everything else, Mega Man X7 brought the franchise to 3D when Legends was forgotten. However, it traded its fast-paced gameplay for a slow, clunky experience, bogged down with awful voice acting and having X sidelined for most of the game, for a character who's no better than X's on a school test. Mega Man in Base was a GBA port of a previously Japan exclusive entry, however it would suffer from a cropped screen, and combined with this game being considered one of the hardest in the entire franchise, you could probably guess the rest. However, it would be the Battle Network series that took the most hits. Network Transmission combined gameplay of the classic Mega Man with the battleship system of BT, however it only resulted in a game where the gameplay mechanics actively fought against you. Rockman EXE WS can be seen as Network Transmission for last gen consoles, and while better, didn't make it out of Japan due to being on the Wonder Swan. Battleship Challenge swapped its strategic gameplay for an automated system fueled by random chances, and it bombed bluer than a beached whale. But Battle Network 4 was where the real battle was, as due to a rushed development, the game would be shipped filled with various glitches, combined with the repetitive gameplay requiring 3 playthroughs just to reach the endgame. Luckily the international releases would patch things up, but at the cost of the translation. The game still sold well, so that's a star. In case you haven't been keeping track, all these games would add up to 23, yes, way more than the anniversary they're celebrating. So while not the most disastrous anniversary, when you release that many games and most fail to impress, you start wondering if Capcom were just trying to make up for lost time, like a musician just getting out of rehab. Luckily, Capcom would learn to treat Mega Man with a little more respect and continue to honour his legacy, which involves hardly giving him any games now. Hopefully Dual Override will be a blast. We now reach an example of no matter how big your franchise is, it doesn't mean you can escape backlash. I'm talking about Star Wars, and to be specific, the story of The Last Jedi. Even if you've ignored the franchise, you can never escape its grasp no matter how much space you put between it. So considering its success, how did it end up in a video like this? Our tragedy begins back in 2015 with the release of The Force Awakens. This movie was a big deal as it was not only the first Star Wars movie in a decade, and the first in the sequel trilogy, but also the first major Star Wars project following Disney's acquisition of Lucasfilms in 2012, while being a follow-up to Return of the Jedi, bringing back characters that audiences fell in love with back in 1983. Following the film's release, it was an immense success, grossing over $2 billion, despite criticisms towards the movie being a remake of A New Hope disguised as a sequel. Regardless, expectations were high for the following movie, as with the 40th anniversary upcoming, it was definitely a great time to be a Star Wars fan. However, signs the sequel trilogy would fly off course was hinted at by various cast members during the press tours and interviews, when answers to questions regarding the movie came off embarrassment to disinterest, with Mark Hamill giving the most hints throughout the lead up to the film. All would be revealed upon the release of the movie, and let's just say people were not happy with what they watched. From the portrayal of Luke Skywalker as an isolated hermit given up on life, various plot points and setups from the previous film being ignored or answered in the most anticlimactic way possible, to characters' conflicts being fueled by contrivance. While you can treat this as fans just simply overhyping a movie, that is far from the truth, as in the following years since the movie's release, stories regarding the sequel trilogy's production have come to light. One major being, following the purchase of Lucasfilms, Disney would discard the treatments of franchise creator George Lucas had for the sequels, instead making their own based on his works. And having spent billions to obtain Lucasfilms, Disney would put the films into production despite not finishing mapping out directions. But the biggest factor was a plan Disney had where each film would be written and directed by a different person, with the goal of injecting a unique style into each movie. However, it was reported that there was little communication between the directors, which became apparent as while The Force Awakens' J.J. Abrams made a traditional film that played it safe, The Last Jedi's Rian Johnson leaned into subversion and misdirection, which while great on paper, isn't the right mindset when handling a franchise as big as Star Wars, where going against tradition can lead like disasters. Despite the movie earning $1.3 billion, Disney panicked regarding the reception to the movie and attempted damage control. This was despite the fact Episode 9 director Colin Trevorrow had completed his script for the third movie, which Disney wanted rewritten before firing him after he couldn't get a version they liked. So J.J. Abrams returned and scrambled to get a new script that would address issues from the previous movie, which would be released as The Rise of Skywalker in 2019, and reception to it was mixed at best, with it earning less than its predecessors, and when you're being beaten by the likes of Frozen 2 and the Lion King remake, you're better off grounding the plane. Despite Star Wars still going strong on Disney+, the handling of The Last Jedi sent the franchise on a flight path that it's never been able to divert from, with projects getting cancelled and being received with less than enthusiasm. If anything should be taken from this, it's to know what makes a franchise work and never destroy its most iconic elements for the sake of being different. Otherwise you get a studio thinking we wanted a musical sequel to Joker. It's fair to say at this point the anniversaries discussed have been nothing more than embarrassing footnotes, but this particular one was so disastrous it's effectively become as legendary as the franchise itself. When it comes to celebrating milestones, Power Rangers has always struggled in this regard. The 10th anniversary episode Forever Red went through hell just to even make it to air, while the 15th anniversary in bringing back past Rangers sidelines the main team in one of the dumbest ways possible. However, 2011 was a great year to be a Power Rangers fan, as Power Rangers Samurai marked the return of franchise creator Haim Saban since selling the PR license to Disney back in 2001, and the Super Sentai series had Kaizoku Sentai Gokaiger celebrate the 30th anniversary of Super Sentai, with the theme being the franchise as a whole, and the timing lining up for Power Rangers to celebrate its 20th anniversary. Fans had every reason to be excited for PR to adapt this season. However, signs that things would crash and burn were hinted when early casting calls suggested an adaptation of Tensou Sentai Goseiger, which was the season prior to Gokaiger, with the reveal that this season, Power Rangers Megaforce, would be an adaptation of both seasons. Not helping was Nickelodeon. The network airing PR at the time had a limit of around 20 episodes per season. This resulted in Samurai being split across 2 years, which meant the adaptation was pushed back to 2013. However, it was then revealed that this first season would only adapt Goseiger, with the Gokaiger portion happening the following year, which meant the core of the 20th anniversary would be happening during the 21st. This reportedly happened due to a contract Saban had with Toei, forbidding them from skipping Sentai seasons. Despite this, fans of the franchise were willing to give the show a chance, as Saban had proved during Mighty Morphin you could adapt multiple Sentais and still have a good show, and the trailer shown at the 2012 Power Morphicon had people excited. That was till Megaforce began airing, as the season drew immediate criticism for lacking character development for the Rangers, the rushed pacing, and most of the episodes being in-suit fights with little moments of the characters' civilian lives, with it becoming apparent that Season 1 was nothing more than filler for the following year. However, it was Super Megaforce that made the fans spin, as most elements of Season 1, from the powers, villains, and story elements were dropped, with Season 2 being almost exclusively fight scenes along with random tribute episodes. And to top it off, the legendary battle that was hyped for 2 years was shoved into the final episode and was done so late the season didn't have a proper ending. Needless to say, fans were absolutely furious at the handling of the season, and still so to this day, and they weren't alone, as cast members would later voice their dissatisfaction along with the revelation that Haim Saban hated the concept of pirates and removed all references to it. Veteran actors of Power Rangers also revealed that invitations to cameo during the season were sent out so late that most hadn't time to commit, and if they did, the pay was too low to travel to New Zealand, which, while Power Rangers normally has a low budget, it's evident watching this season that it's being spent on the wrong things. To sum things up, Power Rangers Megaforce is what happens when the people working on it are just waiting for their paychecks, as well as how legalities force you to have elements that stick out like a dodgy CGI effect. If you want to see Megaforce done right, check out Gokaiger instead. You can tell I just really want you to watch that season.